Hello world, welcome back to the Razor RC, and it's time to do the full review of the Traxxas Maxx V2 version. So this is obviously an update to the original V1 Traxxas Maxx, which I also had. I actually had two Maxes, like an original Max and also one I converted to a wide Max. So very familiar with this line of vehicles. I've made many videos about the Maxx V1. So yeah, I'm very familiar with what this entails. Now the Traxxas Maxx V2 sells for $570 here in the United States. Does feature a few minor updates to it. So the main ones being the sledgehammer tires. These are a little bit grippier than the original Max tires. They did lengthen the truck by about an inch, so about an inch longer in wheelbase. Does have a bigger battery strap compartment, and then they did increase the width as well by about 1.5 inches by basically including the wide Max kit already in the vehicle. So yeah, Traxxas Maxx. This is a 1/10 scale electric four-wheel drive monster truck. I'm very familiar with all the other monster trucks out there. I own pretty much all the 1/10 and 1/8 scale monster trucks out there from Associated, from Corrale, from Arma, from Losi. Pretty much everybody out there I'm very familiar with, if not own pretty much every single one of them. So I'm going to rate this in 7 different categories as usual, talking about the electronics, the build, the design, the support and maintenance, the performance, the durability, finally the value, and then giving you my final conclusion on the Max and how I feel about the truck. So this has long been one of my favorite bashers out there. It has legendary durability. They did make some changes pretty much to popular demand. I personally kind of like the original Max and the way it drove, but we'll talk about how these changes basically affect the vehicle. So kicking it off, we're going to talk about the electronics, and the Max comes with your standard TQI radio from Traxxas. Pretty good radio actually. Has a lot of adjustments, although it does have kind of this complicated LED menuing system to get through it and make all those adjustments. But if you get the Traxxas link, that does actually open those all up so you can modify them through your phone. Really nice thing about the TQI is that it does allow you to bind multiple models to the same radio. So I've got 5 or 6 Traxxas cars. I just use a single radio for all of them, and that's pretty nice that I don't have to have 5 or 6 radios with batteries to control each and every one of them. Trigger feels good. The ergonomics are pretty good. The nice foam wheel. Takes 4 AA's, it's 2.4 gigahertz, no external antenna. So overall, pretty good radio, definitely very good for the RTR class. Popping off the body, we can take a look at the vehicle inside. So it's got that quick release body that pretty much all the new Traxxas cars come with. And you can see what it comes with. It's a 4S capable ESC, large X-Max size servo. This is kind of a proprietary size Traxxas servo, so if you want to use an aftermarket one, you would have to get an adapter plate to fit in a different 25 tooth servo, and then a 36 by 70 can 2400 kV motor. It's also shared with the Haas, so it is 3S or 4S capable, but obviously you would want to run this on 4S. ESC is a little bit lackluster in power. I think the motor is okay. A lot of people like Rich Duperbash have upgraded to like a Max 8 ESC and notice quite a bit improvement in terms of power. Servo is slow, although it has a fair amount of torque. So it is plastic geared, although I never really had problems with my original couple of Maxes, so I don't think they really break very easily, but it is slow and plastic geared, a little bit of a cost saving measure. In terms of electronics, I'm actually going to give it a fair score. I'm going to give it 3 stars out of 5. I think it's fair. ESC may be a little bit down. There's no programming options. Power-wise, I think it's also a little bit down. Could probably use from benefit from some capacitors. Servo, again, it's okay. It's fair because it actually has a decent amount of torque. Never really had problems with it actually breaking or anything like that, but it is quite slow, and I don't like the fact that it is a weird size, and so you do need to buy extra parts if you want to replace that. Motor-wise, it's totally fine. No issues there. And it's nice that it has a heat sink and fan sort of built in so that provides additional cooling. And I do like the radio quite a bit. I think the TQI radio is definitely one of the best RTR radios out there, so that is a nice improvement over some of the other options out there. So in the electronics department, I think it's fair. 3 stars. All these ratings are based on how this compares to the competition. Other things in the 1/10 scale class, 1/8 scale class, to me this is kind of in between, kind of a 1/9 scale type vehicle. It's larger than a 1/8 scale buggy actually, but smaller than a standard 1/8 scale truggy, but then obviously quite a bit bigger than your standard 10 scale monster trucks like the Haas or Stampede or Granite. So this kind of in between, and that's how I'm going to be giving its ratings. Build-wise, the Maxx actually came pretty well built. I find Traxxas vehicles in general to be pretty well put together. They are manufactured in Taiwan, which is a little bit more expensive. In my opinion, has a little bit better quality control than the stuff coming out of China. So in general, I find the Traxxas cars to be fairly well built. The only issue I had was that the center differential did have a missing basically shim inside the center differential. So there's a little shim that covers the O-ring and prevents it from basically getting torn up. Mine was missing, and I didn't really notice until I took apart the center differential. So that was a little bit of a bummer that was missing. So I am going to give it 3 stars just for that. There was an issue there that I did have to order parts, did have to completely reassemble the center differential, and kind of the downside is that I would never have known that unless I actually took apart the center differential. So it's kind of a hidden flaw in the manufacturing process. But overall, the Traxxas is fair. Other than that, I think everything is put together quite well. I always set my endpoints, always calibrate the ESCs, but the rest of the truck, drove straight, no issues with it driving out of the box. So from that perspective, it was totally fine. But I am dinging it just for that missing shim in the center differential. So 3 stars for the build. Most RC cars nowadays do come reasonably well built and will drive, but hopefully they're not missing parts like this one was. The Maxx is obviously very similar to something like an X-Maxx, shares a lot of the same architecture, kind of that bathtub shaped body, the double shear shock mounting locations, aluminum shocks, which is nice, symmetrical front and rear arms and wheels and drive shafts and everything. It does have plastic drive shafts, which I think is a bit of a bummer. All the electronics down one side here, waterproof electronics, and then a very spacious battery strap over here on the left side. So that's kind of one improvement that they made over the original Maxx. The original Maxx had some problems. It would only fit kind of narrower type 4S pack, so I think it was 38 millimeters in height is kind of what you were limited to, and lengthwise a little bit shorter than this. This is a very expansive, very roomy battery strap, so nice to see that. No wheelie bar, no sway bars, not much adjustments in this vehicle. There's no different shock locations up top. There are a couple different spots on the bottom. So those are kind of the good things about the Maxx. I think it is designed for durability, and that's kind of what it's good at. It does have a center differential and cush drive, which I think is a nice improvement. All steel or aluminum metal drivetrain down the middle, although it does have plastic drive shafts, like I mentioned, out to the corners. Now for things I don't like, number one is probably the shocks. The rear shocks and front shocks are exactly the same. That does pose a problem because the rear shocks are too short. It does have issues landing. We'll talk more about that. Really, most modern monster trucks on the four-wheel drive side should have longer shocks in the rear. They didn't fix that. That was one of my complaints with the V1. Another thing I don't like are the stub axles. So it does not have standard 17 millimeter stub axles. You do have to use like this insert into the wheels. You can buy e-revo stub axles and they fit just fine. Not too expensive. I think they're like $20 or so, but it would have been nice to see that included in the vehicle. It does have threaded hinge pins all the way throughout. I don't know why they did that. I mean, that's, I guess, a cost-saving measure, but the threaded hinge pins do tend to back out, especially this front one on the left and this back one over here on the left-hand side from the rear. That I find annoying, one of my complaints with the original V1. And the last thing is a little bit of a pain to work on. Getting into the center differential or getting to the rear differential does take quite a bit of screws to remove. I think it's something like 20 screws to like remove all the bottom pieces. Everything gets worked on from the bottom, which is really, really weird. Most RC cars are either from the top or something like Stampede or Haas. You can basically pull off the front and rear. And this does provide some ability to basically separate the front and rear halves, but that's not actually how you get to the differential. So there's not really a reason to do that in my opinion. So design wise, I think it's kind of one of the weaknesses. They designed this for durability, and I do think it is one of the most durable RC cars out there, but a lot of design issues, I think, the way it's put together to work on, and then also from adjustment side point, and then also just areas where they, basically have some cost-cutting measures like the non-17mm stub axles, the threaded hinge pins, things like that I find are pretty annoying. I don't like the servo. It is a weird size. You can't fit a standard size servo. So there are some other things I like. The clipless body thingy is kind of nice, although the body does tend to fall off by itself, so that's kind of annoying. But yeah, in the design category, I do feel like this is a little bit down from other vehicles out there, plastic axles. I think at the price point that they've got this selling at $570, it should have a little bit more options, a little bit more metal parts, a little bit, areas where they shouldn't have cut some costs. So in the design category, I'm gonna give it 2 stars. I think it is a little below average. Working on this thing is also, again, kind of annoying. So in design, yeah, one of the, sort of minor weaknesses of this vehicle. Now this may piss off some people out there, and I'm just expressing my opinion. I know a lot of people get upset when I criticize their favorite vehicle. Maybe you own a Maxx, maybe you love your Maxx, you think it's the greatest driving RC car you've ever had, and that's fair, that's fine. But this is just my opinion. Performance, again, I think is an area where the Maxx suffers a bit. Power-wise, I think it's a little bit down. The top speed is totally fine. It's sort of in that low 50s mile per hour range, which is totally fine. No issues there. But you can tell it's a little slower to get to that 50 miles per hour. The punch on this thing does seem a little bit down. The power delivery, it's not quite as rough, instantaneous, and aggressive as other 4S vehicles out there. I also have the Creighton 4S. I also have a Techno MT410, which I would consider, two of the main primary competitors to this vehicle. So power-wise, I do feel like it's a little bit down in terms of the punch and the acceleration. Top speed is totally fine. Now the way it drives, again, I find it a little bit lacking. Steering wise, it's got a pretty slow servo. It's got a servo saver, which is weak but not totally bad. Really the main complaint is going to be the servo on why it's so slow steering. Steering wise, it's also pretty vague. With that wide Maxx kit, it does make pretty wide turning radius circles. The narrow Maxx, or the original V1 Maxx, did steer quite a bit better this. It is very noticeable. Even if you send your endpoints, even if you do some tuning with this RC car, it will not drive quite as well as the V1 in terms of the steering and handling department. Obviously, it's wider. It doesn't flip over as much, which is one main complaint with the original V1 Maxx. I do have videos on how to address that. I don't think you need to go to a wide Maxx to get it to avoid flipping over. On asphalt, yes, I would say you need the wide Maxx, but if you're on dirt, any sort of like reasonable off-road surface, I think you get handled totally fine without the wide Maxx. But they included that because that's what people wanted, that's what people thought they needed. But realize when you make something more stable, when you widen it, when you lengthen it, it's going to be more stable. But what does stable really mean? What you've actually done is reduce the steering, reduce the handling, actually make it less agile and more stable. So it doesn't flip over, but it also doesn't steer quite as well as the original V1. Now, jumping and landing is the last category. And again, that is one major complaint I had with the V1. Like I mentioned many times, the rear shocks are too short. They don't have enough range of travel. The rear end slaps a ton. You do need to do some major shock tuning to get to this thing to land reasonably. Obviously, they meant this as a send it type basher, and from a durability perspective, I think they nailed it. This is one of the most, if not the most durable RC cars you can buy. But where you're lacking is honestly in the landing department. I don't know why they didn't really spend more effort on trying to make this thing land better, because if you jump it more than like 4 or 5 feet, it slaps really, really bad. Even after some major tuning, if I'm jumping at 10 feet, it still slaps really bad. People are working on some different pistons, and I have done some tuning, and I'll do that in another video. But out of the box, this is one of the worst jumping RC cars out there. Every other monster truck in its class will not land anywhere nearly as bad as this. So from that perspective, I think it's below average. So overall in the performance category, again, this has nothing to do with durability. This is purely on how it actually drives, how it handles, how it jumps and lands, how it accelerates, how it brakes. I'm giving it a below average score. I'm giving it 2 stars. I think this is one of the worst driving RC cars in its class, and I don't say that lightly because I own many monster trucks of this type out there, and this is probably the worst driving of them all personally, in my opinion. On the good side, the brakes are actually phenomenal. They nail the brake tuning right out of the box. I mean, it's 95% there. I modified some minor things on the braking side, but you know, it's really close out of the box. Don't really think people need to make any adjustments to that. So I know this is gonna make a lot of people upset, but I'm giving you my objective opinion, owning many RC cars. I race RC cars. I own like tons of monster trucks, and performance wise, this is one of the areas I think the Maxx is lacking. Now the flip side of performance is going to be durability, and I would say this is probably the most durable RC car out of the box that you can buy. Certainly a monster truck basher. You know, the X-Maxx is very durable. I think this is actually a little bit more durable than the X-Maxx. The X-Maxx will bend center shafts if you launch it, you know, do double backflips in the air, that kind of thing. This one is super durable. Now, I do think the V1 is slightly more durable than this because with the narrow arms, you don't have quite as much leverage out to the sides. Not as much, you know, basically torque being applied to the arms, to these hubs, all that kind of stuff when you land this thing, when you crash on a corner. But it's still super durable. Definitely 5 stars in the durability category. This is one area where they nailed it with Traxxas. They tried to make the most durable RC car out there, and I think they succeeded. This thing is a beast. There are bigger, heavier RC cars out there, but I don't think that makes them more durable. This is kind of that perfect blend of size, speed, performance, and durability, I think, that you get in this package. So never really had any problems with the V2. I haven't driven it quite as much as the V1. The V1 I did break some things. I did break a shock shaft. I did break a C-hub. Did break a fan. Fairly minor stuff like that, but no major issues. I think I broke a rear hub as well. So from that perspective, I think this is one of the most durable RC cars. And again, that was owning a couple of the V1s over 2 years. So, you know, pretty minor crash damage and things I had to fix in the lifetime of the V1. And the V2, since I've owned it, I actually have not fixed anything. Nothing has broken. The truck seems super solid. Out of the box, I think this is the most durable RC car that they make. So in the durability category, of course, 5 stars. The Maxx, if you want maximum durability, if you want something that you can just send it, not worry too much if you land it wrong, this is probably the best one out there. From that perspective, I also think it makes kind of a good, not really beginner's car, but if you're sort of newer to RC cars, learning how to jump RC cars, learning how to do tricks and backflips and that thing, this is definitely one that I think is good to practice on. Traxxas is one of the easiest RC cars to own, and the reason for that is that they have parts everywhere. I mean, almost every local hobby shop will carry Traxxas, will carry a ton of parts. For the most part, parts do tend to be in stock. Now, at the release of the V2 Maxx, they are missing some parts like the bodies and chassis I think you can't quite get yet, but those should be rectified soon. And so in general, I think Traxxas is definitely one of the easiest brands to own from a parts availability perspective. Their customer support is pretty easy to work with. Their warranty is kind of short. I think it's 30 or 60 days or something like that. Not quite as generous as some of the other brands, but you know, for the most part, they're pretty easy to work with. They have definitely sent out parts to me when there were manufacturing defects and stuff like that without really any questions or anything like that. So yeah, from that perspective, I think the Maxx is definitely tops in that category. Now, from a maintenance side, I do think this below average is a little bit trickier to work on. It is kind of weird. I do think there's, you know, a lot of screws and a lot of pieces you have to remove to get to the different differentials, to the motor meshing and that kind of thing. It's slightly annoying, but once you figure it out, it's not too bad, but definitely a little more annoying than your standard RC monster truck out there. So in the support and maintenance category, I'm gonna give it 4 stars. A little bit harder to work on, but the support side is really convenient. It's nice to be able to just go to your local hobby shop, pick up a part. If you ever break something, slap it on and have it running again, you know, in an hour or so. So in the support and maintenance category, 4 stars, definitely above average and one of the better ones out there. When the original Maxx came out, it sold for $550 or $530, kind of depending on when you got it. They have increased the price to $570, and when the original Maxx came out, I thought $550 was a ridiculous amount of money to pay for basically a plastic 4S RC monster truck. Competitors at the time were things like the Creighton Forest, which sold for $400, so $150 less for similarly equipped vehicle. But a funny thing has happened in the last couple of years. The prices of every RC car has gone up pretty much across the board. Certainly for bashers and race kits, things are $50, $100 more than they were 2 years ago, and the Maxx only went up by $20. So I think that's quite fair, especially when you consider that a little bit more for your money. You got a little bit bigger vehicle, you got the wide Maxx kit, you've got the sledgehammer tires, which I think are better than the original tires. They're not great, but they're okay now, and actually halfway decent on dirt. So in the value category, I think the original Maxx I rated a 1 star out of 5. At the time, $570 was absurd for a 4S plastic RC car, when Armas, for example, were selling for $550. They were actually cheaper. For a 6S metal Arma, you can get cheaper than original Maxx, but now the Armas have increased. They're like $600 now. Pretty much every RC car is kind of in that $500 to $600 price range. Something like a Kaiju is still cheaper, but for the most part, $500 is not unusual for this sort of mid-range type RC car. So in the value category, I'm going to give it 2 stars. It's still below average. I still think it's a bit expensive for what you get, but considering most RC cars are $500 or $600 for this class of vehicle, for kind of an 8 scale or 9 scale monster truck, it's really not that bad as before. So I'm glad that they were able to, sort of keep the price pretty close to the original V1s. And so I'm giving it 2 stars, below average, but I'm not going to ding it quite as much as I did the original. So my final thoughts on the Traxxas Maxx V2. It has some pros, it has some cons, and honestly, I've really liked the original Maxx when it first came out. I didn't really have too many complaints about it at the time. The price was obviously way too high. I thought the handling was quite poor. The jumping and landing was kind of poor. But the V2, they've made some changes, right? They kept the price pretty much the same. They widened it, which makes it more stable, less likely to roll over. But in my opinion, it actually steers less, handles a little bit worse. So I'm not totally convinced that that's actually an improvement. Tires are improvement. They did fix the small battery tray that they had before, so that is a major improvement. There were only a few 4S hard case packs that would fit within the original Maxx V1, although you could get soft case packs that would actually fit. So would I recommend the Maxx V2? It kind of depends what you're looking for. If you're kind of newer, if you like to just launch it, maybe you don't land all that well, maybe you don't care that much about steering, all you do is just drive it in a straight line just off a wooden ramp, launch it in the air, and that's all you do, then the Maxx is actually a pretty good vehicle. You'll probably want to look into upgrading the ESC at some point. It is a little bit slow. It doesn't rotate super well in the air. It can do double backflips, but there are other cars out there that can do triple backflips of this size. So from a performance standpoint, I think it's down. That's really the area I find it's lacking the most. It just doesn't handle that well from a steering, from a drivability perspective. It's a little vague, a little slow, doesn't steer particularly well, but it does actually live up to the durability side. So most durable RC car out there, probably this. This is honestly absurdly durable. Not that you can't break things, of course you can break any RC car, but out of the box, I don't think there's a more durable RC car out there. But you're going to be lacking a bit on the performance side. This is not going to drive as well. Maybe power delivery wise, you're going to feel it's kind of down. You definitely want to do some tuning with the shocks. Out of the box, this thing lands pretty bad. I can't think of another RC car that lands quite as bad as this out of the box, considering it's a 4S monster truck. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Traxxas Maxx V2. It's a good car and certainly one of the ones to consider, especially if you want durability. If that's all you care about, durability, then this is the one to get. But if you're just looking for something a little more on the performance side, I think the Techno MT410 kind of gives you most of the durability of this, as well as way better performance. Crane 4S has been discontinued, so we'll have to see what's going on with that. Arma has talked about them releasing a new update to that, but it's been a year or so since they mentioned anything about the Crane 4S, but hopefully they'll announce that. And Team Corelli has got something on the horizon. There's leaks of something called the Skeeter. Looks like a 4S aluminum chassis, really nice looking 4S monster truck. So hopefully that comes out soon and we'll know whether this is the best 4S monster truck out there. But at the time of this video, this is kind of the only 4S monster truck in its class. The Techno is a kit and a little bit more of a race truck converted into a basher. So if all you want is a 4S super durable RC car, Traxxas Maxx is definitely the one to get, kind of the only one. one to get. So anyways, those are my thoughts on the Maxx V2. Throw down a comment below what you think of the Maxx V2. Do you have one? Do you think it's an improvement? Do you think it drives well? Whatever your thoughts. Don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.